Hello again. My name is Alfonso Ashworth, and I teach a photography course called Light, Vision, and Art. Right here is my manual that I use in the class, and we teach a quite extensive course on lighting. And one of the parts of lighting that we like to address right away is what is the camera in terms of the photographer's interest in it. Well, it boils down to one simple term that I like to use, a phrase that I term in sense of the box with the hole in it. And the box with the hole in it, I've got a couple of cameras sitting over here to the side that I would like to show. And one of them here is one of the older cameras I've got is a Nikon. It's a 35 millimeter film. And also one here that I use quite often is a digital, and it's the Canon 5D. And I'll be talking about it in terms of the box with the hole in it, and I'll be demonstrating those cameras. But if we look at photography, and the term photography means painting with light or writing with light. So to master photography, you have to master light. And one way that we control light with the camera is with a shutter or an aperture. And in combinations, you get what we call an exposure. And what we teach in class, we call it an exposure value. And one of the things I like to talk about with the camera is the term photography in the sense of holding that camera properly and looking at what the components are. So let's look at the components. One of the things about this camera, you'll notice I took the lens off the camera. You can see inside of the camera. I'm going to shine this light so you can sort of see in the camera. You can see the mechanics. One mechanic is the mirror, the SLR, and that stands for a single lens reflex. And then the other component is sort of hidden behind the lens and the mirror would be the shutter blades. The shutter we describe in our class, we talk about it as the time and instance. The time and instance is just whatever time it takes for that shutter to open and close. In between that cycle is the exposure time. Now, when in essence, what is happening is more so you would be equivalent to you blinking your eyes. So your eyelids would be a type of shutter. So if I blinked and opened, that would be classified as a shutter cycle. The other component is a little more complex in terms of what it is and how it works, but I relate it to your eyes, in sense the iris. As it would open and close, you get what we call the aperture. Now I'm going to show you a close-up view of that over here on this camera. If you can get me the camera 2, please. On camera 2, you can see right here I've got the lens open, and if I shine the light through the lens, you can sort of see how the light goes through, and that would be the aperture. So if I close the aperture, less light would go through. So by opening and closing the aperture, I can control the amount of light. And the box with the hole in it is relatively simple, because I can now show you and demonstrate that by holding the shutter open. Open the back of the camera here. Let me get it open. And if I push the shutter blade down, you will see now that we have a hole or an opening. So now we have a box with a hole in it. And while that is open, the only thing between you and the outside world at this point is the lens. So I really encourage that you get really good lenses for your camera. I really don't like skimping on the lenses. A lot of people will tell you that it doesn't matter, but I will be a witness to doing this for over, say, 30 years, that the glass or the lens is probably the most important element to you getting very good exposures accurate color, reproduction, sharpness, and consistency over the time of the exposure itself. So if you really want to invest well in your camera gear, I would put most of my investments into my lenses. And that would depend, of course, on the type of style of shooting that you do. So when we're looking at this in terms of the exposure, the time and instance that we talked about with the shutter, and the description given to the aperture, we would say that in terms of light and distance. With those things in combination, you then have what we call a properly exposed image. Now that goes into some more detail, and I'll probably be talking about that more in another class. But we just want to emphasize that your camera is just a box with a hole in it. But unless you really spend time with your camera, getting to know the components, getting to know the features, and understanding how they operate, you're going to be probably short in terms of how accurate you can be, how quick you can get your exposures, and how much more detail that you can get into your photography without knowing your camera. So I'd encourage you to spend a lot of time with your camera, get the book out, learn the camera, get in some classes, and if you're in my area, you can surely get in my class called Light Vision Art, and I've taught many, many students. So I'm going to close today. We'll come back at another time, and we'll talk about exposures, but I want to thank you for allowing me to spend a few moments talking about the box with the hole in it.